Welcome everyone to a special Christmas edition of Why's That Dad? A show where the big questions from young minds lead us on adventures through history, culture, and faith? Yep, that's right. Today we're answering 3 mythconceptions about Christmas. If you're new to the show, usually one of my kids asks an apparently simple question, and I go into the science, history, and culture of it. But not today. Honestly, I was going to stick to the science like usual and talk about the ocean as a thermal battery, but it's already been cold enough this winter, so I didn't want to talk about the weather. Anyways, I'm your host, Phil, and with me today is my curious co-host, Dominic.
Good tidings to you. Merry Christmas.
We're recording this deep in the heart of Advent, with our wreath on the table and Christmas lights twinkling outside. It's a season full of wonder, but also, for a curious teenager like Dominic, full of questions. This year, those questions were so good, we decided to build a whole episode around them. Before we start, I'll preface by saying we're Catholic, so we're like Christians before the Reformation, if you weren't familiar. Don't worry, I won't be doing too much evangelizing and keeping this episode more about history and culture. And a spoiler alert, we'll be discussing Santa Claus's origin story, so if you have little ones with you that you want to believe in the magic of Kris Kringle, you may want to tune in when they aren't around.
We love all our Christmas and Advent traditions. The Advent wreath, putting up the tree, making cookies, St. Nicholas's feast day with stocking stuffed with goodies. But I started noticing things or hearing stuff that made me go, that doesn't make sense. What does that mean? It was like finding a thread on a sweater and gently pulling it.
And discovering it's connected to this whole amazing intricate tapestry you never saw before. And that's what we did. We gently pulled on 3 of those threads. What we found was that the real stories behind our traditions are more fascinating and often more faithful than the simplified versions we sometimes hear. Maybe you have heard of some of these before, but many of these were surprises to me, so I wanted to share them with Dominic and the audience. I think it's important to expose our kids to some of this to give them a deeper understanding of the reason for the season and tradition. Some of it goes back 2,000 years, and some of it is just 100 years old. Okay, Dominic, what's your first question?
Okay, this is the most important question. At church, during the Christmas Eve Mass, we heard the beautiful readings from the Gospels of Luke and Matthew. The angel, the shepherds, the star, the manger. I love it, and it seems like the perfect time of year for Jesus Christ's birth. But this year, I was following along in the missalette, and I realized something. It never says December 25th. It doesn't even really say it was winter. The Bible doesn't tell us a date, yet we celebrate Christ's birth on December 25th. Why's that, Dad?
That's a great observation, Dominic. You put your finger on a mystery that historians and saints have studied for 1,700 years. And your starting point is exactly right. Our faith is rooted in historical events, but the inspired writers of the Bible were concerned with the theological truth, not the calendar dates. The fact that God became man, the incarnation, is what matters infinitely more than the day of the week it happened.
But if it's not in the Bible, did we just make it up? I figured it would be too cold in December for shepherds to be outside. Yet the Bible says they were watching their flocks by night, and you wouldn't do that in the winter.
That's a classic objection. It sounds logical, but it actually misses the geography of the Holy Land. December in Israel is the rainy season. That's when the grass grows. In the hot summer, the hills are brown and dry, but in December, they are green. Shepherds would absolutely have their sheep out in these pastures. In fact, ancient Jewish sources mention that sheep meant for the temple sacrifice were kept in the fields near Bethlehem all year round.
Oh, so the too cold theory is a bust?
Pretty much, but still doesn't give us a date. For the first few centuries, there was no universal consensus. The pinnacle of the Christian year was always Easter, the resurrection. The celebration of Christ's birth was often wrapped up in an earlier feast called Epiphany on January 20th. Was often wrapped up in a feast called Epiphany on January 6th.
So how did we land on December 25th?
There are 2 primary theories. For us as Catholics, they don't cancel each other out. They show the twofold mission of the Church, outward engagement with the world and deep internal prayer.
What's the first one, the outward one?
Scholars call it the history of religions, or baptism of a festival theory. In the 3rd and 4th centuries, the Roman Empire had a major public holiday on December 25th. The Feast of Sol Invictus, the unconquered sun. Think about how dark it is outside right now, Dominic. It's 8:17, and the sun is already gone. Okay, my script says 5, but Yeah, it's pretty dark outside right now. The Romans felt that darkness too. They celebrated the winter solstice because it was the moment the sun finally began to wane and the days started getting longer. Now, enter the early church fathers. They looked at their culture and saw people yearning for light in the depth of winter. They didn't tell them to stop celebrating. They told them who they were actually looking for. They proclaimed, "You were celebrating the rebirth of the sun? We celebrate the birth of the true sun, the son of justice prophesied in Malachi, the light of the world."
So Christians copied the pagan holiday?
No, that's a common claim critics of Christianity make, and you'll find out this has little historical evidence. But we'll go with this theory for now. I think the Christians just marketed their religion well. It was smart thinking. Anyways, under this theory, they didn't copy it, they just rebranded the feast.
No, they baptized the holiday. They saw a need people already felt and showed them the real answer.
Exactly, that's enculturation. It's what St. Paul did in Athens when he used their own unknown God altar to talk about Jesus. It's a sign of confidence. The church says all human longing finds its fulfillment in Jesus Christ.
You said there was a second theory, one from inside the church?
This is my favorite because it's so poetic and the one more historians agree with. It's called the calculation or integral age theory. In ancient Jewish and Christian thought, there was a belief that great prophets were conceived and died on the very same calendar date.
Like a perfect circle?
Precisely. It's the idea that God's works are perfect and complete. The early church calculated that Jesus was crucified on March 25th. Now, if he died on March 25th, the integral age theory says he must have been conceived on March 25th, the moment the Alpha and the Omega entered the world. That's the Feast of the Annunciation, which we still celebrate today.
Okay, April, May, June, July, August, September, October, November, December. March 25th plus 9 months is December 25th.
You got it. And here's the kicker. St. Hippolytus of Rome wrote about this December 25th date around the year 200 AD. That is a century and a half before we have a historical evidence of the Sol Invictus holiday being celebrated in 354. Hence why I said the first theory probably isn't correct, but it's still a theory.
So we might have had the date before the pagans did?
It's very likely, but with history, not much is certain. After all, like you said, no one ever wrote down this birth date in sacred scripture. Early Christians had nothing else to go on. It was about sacred symmetry. The date of Christ's conception is linked to his death, and his birth completes the cycle.
So which one is the real reason?
I believe the Holy Spirit works through both. The internal logic of the church settled on the date because of that beautiful, perfect circle of Jesus' life. Then, providentially, that same date allowed the church to speak to the Roman world and say, "The light you are searching for in the darkness isn't a star or a sun. His name is Jesus." It's the church's way of saying the dawn has finally come. But yes, I believe in the second theory. I think that's the correct one.
Awesome. All right, next one. This is about Santa Claus. We know about St. Nicholas. We celebrate his feast day on December 6th by leaving our stockings out. St. Nicholas, stuffs them with goodies. He's a real saint. But the Santa Claus at the mall with the reindeer and the ho-ho-ho, sometimes those Santas give me the creeps. Anyway, how did we go from a 4th century Catholic bishop, St. Nick, to a sleigh-riding, elf-managing jolly guy in a red suit? That's a far cry from a saint. Why's that, Dad?
It's a huge leap, but that's because it's not a straight line. It's a sprawling 1700-year-old travelogue. The modern Santa is like a cultural snowball. He started as one holy man, and as this story rolled through different countries and centuries, it picked up new layers. A name from here, a trait from there, a whole new address from somewhere else. To understand him, we have to meet all the different figures who ended up merging into one job description. First, we have the foundation, St. Nicholas of Myra, 3rd to 4th century in modern Turkey. It all begins with a historical bishop. He was famous for secret, miraculous generosity. The big legend says he saved 3 poor girls from a terrible fate by tossing 3 bags of gold through their window at night, gold that supposedly landed in stockings or shoes drying by the fire. He was also a fierce defender of the faith, our faith. So our core is a bishop, a secret gift giver, and a protector, with a feast day in early December.
So he's the real guy. But how did we get from a saint to a guy with flying reindeer?
Through centuries of travel and storytelling. After he died, Italian sailors moved his relics to Bari, Italy in 1087. but his legend traveled north into colder climates, where it started to blend with much older local folklore. Next, we have the Northern European blend. In places like the Netherlands, he became Sinterklaas, from Sint Nicholas. Here, he changed. He arrived by ship. Since his relics came by sea, the Dutch pictured him sailing from Spain on a steamboat each November. He was a stern judge. He became a more solemn, bishoply figure who carried a book of children's deeds. And we have the introduction of his first helper, Zwart Piet. This was a key addition. Zwart Piet, or Black Peter, who started as a scary figure with a sack and rods, but became a playful assistant. The rods were meant for beating naughty kids, and the sack, if you were really naughty, were for hauling kids away to Spain. This created the model of a main gift giver with magical helpers, the early idea for elves, and if you were naughty, you'd pay for it. His story also likely brushed up against ancient Norse and Germanic winter legends. Figures like Odin, who led a wild winter hunt across the sky on an 8-legged horse, Sleipnir, or the Tante, a household gnome who expected gifts, added elements of magical sky travel and a connection between behavior and rewards.
Okay, so the Dutch gave him helpers in a boat, but what about the name Santa Claus?
That's the Dutch gift to America. When Dutch settlers came to New Amsterdam, later New York, they brought Sinterklaas. English-speaking kids heard it and said it in their way, Santa Claus.
But wait, how did he get the name Kris Kringle then? Sounds nothing like Santa Claus, Saint Nick, or anything yet mentioned.
Well, during the Protestant Reformation, Martin Luther wanted to focus less on saints. In Germany, he promoted the idea that the Christ child, das Christkind, or Christkindl, was the gift bringer. This was an angelic, sprite-like figure. German immigrants brought the Christkindl to America. English-speaking children heard Christkindl, and it came out as Kris Kringle. In the Great American Mashup, the German gift-bringer's name got stuck onto the Dutch Sinterklaas figure. So now Santa had an alias.
Whoa, so Kris Kringle and Santa were from different countries and different Christian traditions. And America just fused them?
Exactly, and we're still not done. We need an Englishman for the personality. Meanwhile, England had its own figure, Father Christmas. His roots were in pagan midwinter festivals like the Yule. He wasn't a gift giver, but the spirit of the season. A big, bearded, jolly man in the green or brown robes who stood for feasting, warmth, and good cheer during the long, dark winter. He was all about the party. This is who the Ghost of Christmas Present is supposed to represent in Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol. That's the personality of Father Christmas. Obviously, the Muppets' Christmas Carol displays this best. Then we have the Great American Merge in the 17th and 19th centuries. It's when the Puritans faded and different immigrants mingled in America. These figures collided. The Dutch Sinterklaas met the English Father Christmas and was given the German alias Kris Kringle. This blend needed a home and a final shape, and 19th century America provided it through writers and artists. So in 1809 we have Washington Irving. In his stories, he described a jolly, pipe-smoking Santa Claus who flew in a wagon, adding to the magical folklore. In 1823, Clement Clark Moore, and his poem A Visit from St. Nicholas was the Big Bang. It gave us a sleigh, 8 named reindeer, the chimney entrance, and the jolly old elf. And then from the 1860s to 1880s, Thomas Nast. He is the cartoonist that gave Santa his visual form and, crucially, his address. In his famous drawings for Harper's Weekly, he showed Santa's workshop at the North Pole. This was a stroke of genius. It was neutral, because no country owned it. It was perpetually wintry, perfect for reindeer. And it was mysterious and magical, the unexplored Arctic.
But Dad, the geographic North Pole isn't land, it's shifting ice on an ocean.
You've hit on why it's the perfect magical address. It's a real place that's also impossible to pin down. But the image wasn't fully standardized yet. For that, we need one last chapter. By the early 1900s, Santa appeared in many colors. Red, blue, green, brown. Then Coca-Cola hired artist Hayden Sundblom to paint a Santa for their ads. Sundblom's Santa was realistic, irresistibly jolly, and wore a vibrant, specific red. This image, seen by millions every year, became the global standard. He didn't invent the red suit, but he made it the only suit that mattered worldwide.
So let me get this straight. Santa is a Turkish bishop Delivered by Dutch sailors, renamed by German immigrants, given a party personality by the English, equipped with Norse magic and reindeer by American poets, given a home at the North Pole by a cartoonist, and dressed by a soda company?
That is the perfect one-sentence biography. The thread that runs through it all, from the ancient church to the modern mall, is a timeless spirit of selfless giving, enjoying the darkest time of year. The church gave us a saintly model of charity. Every culture that embraced the story added its own costume, character trait, or splash of color. Santa Claus isn't just a person. He's a living tradition, a testament to how we collectively build icons of hope and generosity.
Last one. This is about a word. I see Xmas written on signs and ads, sometimes even on cards. A teacher at school said it's bad, that the X is like crossing out Christ, making Christmas secular.
A teacher at school? You're homeschooled. Was it Mom?
Yeah, she said they're taking Christ out of Christmas. Well, anyways, I was looking at one of the big prayer books at church, and I saw what looked like an X and a P combined. Maybe an X doesn't mean the removal of something. Anyways, people put Xmas instead of Christmas on signs and cards. Why's that, Dad?
This is a great one to clear up because I was told the same thing when I was a kid. I'll preface that Xmas certainly takes up less space than writing Christmas, and there may be good logistical reasons to reduce letter count. But there's more to it. Not only is Xmas not inherently disrespectful, it is a venerable, centuries-old Christian abbreviation. The misunderstanding comes from a simple case of lost knowledge. People today see the English letter X and think cross out or unknown variable. But in Xmas, the X isn't an English letter at all. It's the Greek letter chi, which is written as an X. And this is the key. Chi is the first letter of the Greek word for Christ, Christos.
Which is...
I can't read that Greek.
Kai Piu.
It's all Greek to me, man.
So from the very beginning, the X was Christ.
Exactly. Early Christians, especially during times of persecution in the Roman Empire, used the chi as a secret symbol to mark meeting places and graves. They often combined it with the second letter of Christos, which is rho, looks like a P, creating the chi-rho monogram. This is one of the oldest Christian symbols in the world, the Christogram. You see it on priestly vestments, altar clothes, in stained glass, and in ancient catacomb art. Later, in the monasteries of the Middle Ages, scribes copying the Bible, missals, and theological works by hand worked under immense pressure. Parchment was expensive, ink was time-consuming to make, and space was precious. They developed a system of standard scribal abbreviations called nomina sacra, or sacred names. For Christ, they would often write the X, or XP, chi-rho. The Mass part, M-A-S, is simply Old English for Mass, capital M-A-S-S, from the Latin Missa, and that's what Catholics, their Catholic Sunday service is called.
So Xmas is literally, letter for letter, Christmas.
Precisely. It's as Catholic as illuminated manuscripts of the Book of Kells. It was a practical, reverent shorthand used by faithful monks. The idea that it's a modern, secular corruption is a complete historical inversion. Now, one might personally prefer to use the full, beautiful word Christmas to avoid any confusion, and that's a fine choice. But a claim that Xmas is inherently an attack on Christ is to unintentionally slander 1,000 years of pious Christian scribes who used it for the glory of God. So, Dominic, after this deep dive into history, theology, and folklore, what's your big takeaway? And what did we learn by pulling on these three threads of the Christmas tapestry?
I think I learned that our traditions are like a big old tree. The roots are the really important part. That's the faith. The fact that Jesus came to save us. That's deep installed and doesn't change. But the branches and leaves, the date we pick, the stories we tell about Santa, even the word Xmas, they grow and change shape over the years. They get blown by the wind of different cultures and times. Some branches might even get pruned, like when the Puritans tried to chop the whole thing down. But the tree survives, and it keeps growing new leaves. Knowing how the tree grew doesn't hurt it. It makes you appreciate how strong and alive it really is.
You've described the living reality of sacred tradition perfectly well. The deposit of faith is the unchanging root. The traditions, with a small t, are the living expressions of that faith in time. They're how the Church, as a mother, makes a timeless mystery of the Incarnation tangible, lovable, and celebratable for her children in every age. Knowing that December 25th was a strategic choice doesn't weaken our celebration. It shows the church wisely planting the gospel in the soil of human culture. Seeing Santa's evolution doesn't ruin the magic. It shows how a saint's charity is so powerful it sparks the imagination of the whole world. These stories don't undermine Christmas. They reveal the incredible, messy, human journey of trying to hold on to and share an inexpressible joy.
It makes me feel connected, like we're part of this really long story that started a long time ago and isn't finished yet.
We are, and by asking these "Why's that, Dad?" questions, you're actively engaging with that story, making it your own. That's what keeps it alive.
Thanks for always having an answer, or at least knowing where to look for one, Dad. Anyways, let's get to our questions. I'm going to ask you 3 trivia questions to test your listening. If you know the correct answer, you won't get coal in your stocking. If you don't know it, Zwart Piet is going to bring you back to Spain. First question. What is believed to be the most accurate theory behind the dating of Christmas? Second question. Which religious figure was responsible for trying to replace the saints, getting rid of St. Nicholas and replacing him with Christkindl? Third question. The Cairo monogram is also known by another name. What is it?
And thank you, our extended family of listeners, for joining us in this exploration, from our home to yours, as we await the celebration of the Nativity of our Lord. We wish you a blessed, peaceful, and deeply joyful Christmas season. May the wonder of the Incarnation fill your hearts and homes.
Merry Christmas!
And we'll see you next time with more questions on Why Is That, Dad? I think we'll be taking a week off for some rest and relaxation and needed family time. God bless. Merry Christmas.